An error occurred. Wait a moment. Then try again. Okay.
We're live.
All right. I don't know. The interesting start there. Not the usual technically sound proficient beginning that we usually have is getting the spinning wheel. But we are live here with the Kauffman Corner Podcast and a lot to get to tonight. If you're catching us via the podcast later on, remember we stream live Sunday nights at 10 p.m. Sometimes Monday if schedules bump us around. But tonight a big podcast for you coming up. We're very pleased. Bill Mitchell is going to join us from Baseball America, the Royals correspondent. He's put together the Royals top 10 prospect list, and Rany is so excited. He's on the edge of his seat to break down the Ryan Yarbrough signing for the Kansas City Royals.
Can't wait.
Cannot wait. I know how you're bubbling. We'll do that after the top 10 list with Bill Mitchell. Let's get things going here on the Kauffman Corner.
This is the Kauffman Corner Podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Royals, breaking down the Royals like no one else can. Kauffman Corner is hosted by Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro. Rany is a co-founder of Baseball Prospectus, author of Rany on the Royals, and former columnist for Grantland, The Ringer, and The Athletic. Soren is the award-winning afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Kauffman Corner is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are your hosts, Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro.
All right, thank you very much, Curtis. We appreciate it, getting things started here on the Kauffman Corner Podcast. And as we mentioned, Rany, the Royals top 10 prospect list, we've got it. Bill Mitchell for Baseball America is in the waiting room. He's going to join us here in a second. Very exciting. We're into, it's not quite the new year, but we're getting into the new season. I know we got a couple of special episodes coming up where we're going to break down our all-time Royals. That's something to look forward to. But we're going to find out how dumb are we, right? Because Bill is going to break down exactly what the top 10 list. We did this a little while ago. Are you nervous that we're going to look ridiculous?
I'm always nervous that I'm going to look ridiculous, Soren. It is, to me, it's officially prospect season when Baseball America drops their top 10. You and I, of course, when you're rooting for a team that lost 97 games, every season is prospect season. And we certainly couldn't wait to get started with our list. We broke that down at the first week of October. But I am very curious to hear Bill's take and see how close you and I were to getting it right.
Yeah, no doubt. Without further ado, let's bring in Bill Mitchell from Baseball America. He's the guy who puts it all together and will give us the breakdown on whether or not we got it right. We'll compare and contrast. Bill Mitchell joins us here on the podcast. Bill, how are you, sir?
I am doing fine tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, it is great to have you with us and talk a little Royals baseball prospect. And listen, let's just start with this. I don't know, labor of love, excruciatingly difficult putting together the Royals top 10 list. How does it compare to some of the other ones you put together?
This is about, I think, the 13th or 14th year I've been doing organizational prospect reports. This was a little more difficult this year with the Royals, mostly because 10 players that were on last year's list graduated. So, and then there are a lot of new players coming in from other organizations. So it took a little more work and a lot more conversations to put this one together.
So, Bill, the thing that really struck me when the list came out, I've always considered not necessarily a bad sign, but not a good sign when an organization's top prospect is the player they just selected in the first round. If they had the number one pick in the draft, that's one thing. But the Royals were drafting 10th, and yet Gavin Cross was their number one prospect. But I thought what was really interesting, it maybe not a good way, was that you had their second round pick, Caden Wallace, listed as their number 2 prospect. And I feel like that is a very rare thing for a team's top 2 prospects to be the 2 guys they just selected in the most recent draft. And so I'm very curious how much of that ranking is a reflection of their talent, especially having a second round pick that is already ranked that high, and how much of that is kind of an indictment of where the farm system is at this moment?
As far as putting Cross number one, Cross being number one in the organizations, that's really not a stretch at all. Obviously Bobby Witt was number one as soon as he got drafted, and going back beyond that, Nick Prado, I believe, was number one the year he was drafted. As far as Wallace being there, I would say he's a legit top 5 or top 10 prospect, but you've got to look at how many players mid-season moved up to the big leagues that would have normally been on this list. You could have had Prado, Melendez, my man Pasquantino, Massey. Any of those could have been in there in that top 5. So I think that's it more than anything. Now, we did have some players go backwards this year, especially in the pitchers. So that had something to do with it too, to a degree.
Do you like how you? I know Rany just talked about Caden Wallace and where he's at. I mean, how often is a second round pick up there this quickly, right? Like, have you ever seen that? I think that's the thing that shocked me. Like, I get Gavin Cross. A lot of times, there are no warts on a high school or college player, so we haven't had any failures yet. So they go up to the top. But for a second round pick to do it, does that speak to how great a pick this was for the Kansas City Royals, or more to, like you said, how many they graduated and how barren this is?
I think more just how many they graduated. Now, I got good reports on Wallace. Scouts that got to see him both in instructional league and when he went to Columbia had a lot of good things to say. They feel he's that he can solve the third base problem that the Royals have had for some time. But yeah, it's not normal for a second round pick to be number 2 in the organization his first year. It's a little out of the ordinary.
And then you had Drew Waters at 3, and I think he was the guy. I feel like he's the guy who you could rank almost anywhere in the top 10 because he's such a hard guy to get a handle on. I mean, the Braves were willing to give him up and additional talent for a supplemental first round pick. He looked like a guy who had worn out his welcome a little bit in Atlanta, and yet as soon as he joined the Royals farm system, his bat came alive. They brought him to the majors just a month later, and he was surprisingly, effective. He was essentially an average major leaguer down the stretch. Just 2 months after he couldn't really hit well in AAA for the Braves. And so I'm pleased to see his as high as he is on the list, because that suggests to me that you think, or your contacts with the Royals and other organizations would suggest that improvement he made was real. And I'm curious, is this a shining example of the Royals hitting development, really making some adjustments with him? Like what is it that made him suddenly perform better once he joined the organization?
I know it's a little bit of a cliche to say that a player needs a change of scenery, but I think that was the case with Waters and different voices helping him. The big thing was they didn't make any mechanical changes to his swing, but it was more, he was being more consistent, making better decisions at the plate. And the comment I got was learning to look for his pitches. And if you look at his numbers, again, it's a small sample, partial season, his walk rates close to doubled from his time to Gwinnett until with what he did in Omaha and then also in Kansas City. So I think there were just some changes. And again, a different voice talking to him.
Yeah.
Go ahead. If it sticks, I think there, with the way he can play outfield, I think there's a starting outfielder there, but that's a big question yet.
Yeah. Is how much do we as Royals fans, can we hang our hat on the fact that this is an organization that can fix people, right? That can get in the business. We've seen a lot of guys struggle, and it seems like over the last couple of years on the hitting side, much work to do on the pitching side, which we'll get to in a minute. But on the hitting side, we've seen them have some successes and bring guys along and be able to tweak it. We've seen a lot of other clubs do that. The Royals look like they're able to do it. How much is in your mind is that becoming beyond just the change of scenery, but that the Royals are starting to maybe have the people in place to fix whatever ails good prospects from other teams?
They've got a lot of good people in their minor league hitting group. Of course, mid-season, Alec Zumwalt, who was running that, got promoted to the big league staff. And I just talked to him recently, and I think he likes being a big league coach, but he does miss working hands-on with the the minor leaguers, which, and again, that's just the feeling I got. But they've got some good people there. You look just what they did with Nick Prado and MJ Melendez after their horrendous years in what affiliate was that? Wilmington. It speaks to what they've done and what they did with the Vinny Pasquantino. He went from being off our prospect list to, I think, number 30. That if he'd have stuck around, he'd have been number 1. In fact, in our mid-season report last year, before he went to the big leagues, we had him ranked number 1 in the organization. So there's a lot of success stories to make the hitting development look good.
That's the good news, the hitting side. The pitching side, a little bit of a different story. That has been one of the running themes of our podcast all season long. And obviously, at the end of the season, the Royals finally acknowledged we may have had a point and let go pitching coach Cal Eldred. And since then, they've brought in new pitching coach from outside the organization from the Rays in Brian Sweeney, and then an assistant pitching coach as well from the Minnesota Twins and Zach Bove. But I'm curious as to what you have heard about how the Royals, if they've made any changes at the minor league level or are intending to make changes at the minor league level in terms of pitching development, if they've brought in new people or new approaches to work with their minor league prospects. Because as you made the point, as disappointing as the season was at the major league level, and the Royals were last in the American League in basically every pitching category imaginable, that was just as bad a season at the minor league level with guys like Asa Lacy and Alec Marsh really having disappointing seasons. So I'm curious as to whether you've heard that the Royals are acknowledging that there is a problem, not just at the major league level, but in terms of minor league development, if they're doing anything about it.
Well, they do acknowledge that there is a problem at the minor league level from the sources that I've heard from. How much Brian Sweeney and Zach Bove, or Bove, however you pronounce his name, what effect they will have rolling down to the minor league system, I don't know. I haven't heard of anybody new coming in yet to the minor league organization. I've unofficially heard of a few people that aren't there anymore. I can't mention names because it's my report, or my room, or what I've heard is very unofficial, and I really don't know the reasons for them not being there. But it does seem to indicate that yes, there are going to be some changes done before next year.
Yeah, and changes that need to be done. What is it a matter of one guy, two guys? Is it a matter of just an overall philosophy? Like, Bill Fisher was a guy that was instrumental early on in Dayton Moore's career and was a long-time pitching guy, but that was an archaic, I'm going to say it, way of going about developing pitching. Not as bad 20 years ago or 17 years ago, whenever he was first here. But the game has changed. I think Rany even said this once in one of our podcasts, that in the last 5 years, the game has moved forward as far as it did in the previous 50 years, right? Like everything, even if you go back just from Moneyball, the writing of Moneyball and the idea of the analytics, to now, that's more than the game changed from its inception to when Moneyball was written. Is it a matter of one guy, or is it a matter of the Royals are just 20 years in the past?
That I really don't know, how far they are in the past, if they're in the past, or if they just need some new voices coming in, maybe some new methodologies to work with the pitchers. That I think we'll find out more once spring training rolls around.
Well, two of the guys who I would say, especially when you consider the sort of the baseline level of failure at the minor league level, who were actually kind of sneaky promising this season, where the two high school guys that they took with their first 2 picks in last year's draft, right? Ben Caderna and Frank Mazzucato. And Soren and I sort of debated all year long who was actually the better prospect. And I think you kind of, summed it up by having them ranked back to back. You have Caderna at 4 and Mazzucato at 5.
Exactly.
And, I think our impression was, certainly Caderna got off to a great start early in the year, just performance wise. But Mazzucato sort of came on sneakily as the season went along. He has, his command is not nearly as polished as Caderna. He still walked too many guys, like pretty much every pitcher in the organization. But given his youth, given his sort of projectability in terms of his his body type and the fact that he's a lefty and a little bit younger, and his strikeout rate was higher, that he seemed to be the guy who might actually have higher upside. Is that sort of a fair statement to say that Caderna may be a safer prospect, a higher floor, but that Mazzucato might be the guy who has a better chance of, if everything develops, according to plan, becoming a star?
I think what you've said is true. I don't know that there's as much difference in their ceiling. They're very two different. They're very different types of pitchers, and I got a lot of good reports on Caderna, and then, as you said, Mazzucato as the season went on. We're still looking at two guys that have pitched less than one full season in the minor leagues. After they were drafted, they didn't go out to an affiliate or didn't pitch in rookie ball. They didn't pitch at all until instructional league. They pitched in spring training, then stayed behind in minor league spring training. So their season didn't start until sometime in May. I think they reported about a week apart to Columbia. So we're still looking at just less than 1 year of background on these two pitchers. So I think we need to get another year to really have a good feel for their ceilings.
I want to go a little further on that. First of all, I want to remind people our Kauffman Corner podcast brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the greater Kansas City metro area, everywhere in Kansas City. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Little problems, big problems. It's no problems at all if you get Gann Asphalt and Concrete. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. You can find them online at GannAsphalt.com. That's GannAsphalt.com, or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Bill, and we're talking to Bill Mitchell from Baseball America. You mentioned the fact that they didn't pitch till May. This was a titanic red flag for me. I feel better now having watched some of the numbers that they put up, and certainly with Mazzucato progressing towards the end. But, I've had conversations with people in the organization, and I'm like, hey, are you hiding these guys? And they're like, look, we have a way that we like to do this, and this is our approach, and we're not going to worry about what other people think. Okay, that sounds great, unless other people do it better. How much of a red flag is it that they sort of hid these two guys? And really, I think even the Drew, almost said Drew Pomerantz. That's not it.
Shane Panzini.
They kind of hit those three guys on backfields, basically. I mean, how much of a concern is that, for you when they take top prospects and they don't get them out on the field and get them going right away?
I don't see it as a red flag at all. They want to manage innings on these guys in their first couple of years. And the best way they can do that is to delay getting them out to an affiliate. And again, I mentioned earlier that I was on a White Sox pod last night because I did their report. And we talked about Noah Schultz, who was their first round draft pick this year out of high school in Chicago. And when I wrote his report, I said, he likely will start the year in extended spring training so they can manage his innings. So, and I've seen that with other pitchers over the years. They're I don't want to say they're treated with kid gloves. They're just treated cautiously early on in their careers.
So, one pitcher who is at a point in his career where he doesn't need to be managed for innings is Alec Marsh, who we mentioned briefly, who came into the season as one of the most promising pitchers in the organization. He had missed part of last year with some injuries, but before that really had showed some of the best stuff in the organization, and really just had an exasperating season because on the one hand, he struck out 147 batters in 114 innings. I believe he set the all-time Northwest Arkansas team strikeout record. On the other hand, he had a 7.32 ERA because he just, despite all the strikeouts, he could not actually get guys out the rest of the time. I thought it was a positive sign at the end of the year that the Royals added him to the 40-man roster because, while as much as he struggled, he was a starter, and you could always take a struggling starter, put them in the bullpen, and the Royals must have thought that there was some risk that a team would look at him and see a guy that they could try as a reliever in the major leagues right away. But I'm curious what you've heard about why he struggled so much and what the Royals, are doing to try and fix him, whether that means moving him into the bullpen where he potentially could be a dominant reliever or keeping him in the rotation.
They still plan, at least, as far as any of us know, they plan to keep him in the rotation. The biggest thing I heard was, and the statement was, he was throwing too many strikes. and instead of not enough, which we don't always hear. But the big thing was he was just missing his location with his fastball, getting too many balls right in the middle of the plate, and obviously you do that, you're going to get hit. We've had scouts, that were raving about how good his stuff was, but it's just a matter of getting the command down with him. And whether that's making a few adjustments in the delivery or his pitch selection or whatever, I don't think he's that far away from getting back to where he was before.
Another guy that's not on the list, by the way, I guess just if people haven't seen it, the Bills top 10 list, Gavin Cross, last year's first round pick, number 1, the outfielder, Caden Wallace 2, Drew Waters 3, Ben Caderna 4, Frank Mazzucato 5, Maikel Garcia, one of Rany's favorites, the shortstop 6, Tyler Gentry, outfielder 7, Nick Lofton 8, Angel Zerpa 9, or Angel Zerpa 10, catcher Carter Jensen. That's the top 10 list. Another one of the pitchers, Bill, that's not on that list is Asa Lacy, and we spent a decent amount of time talking about him. It was a horrific season. It's as bad a season as you can have for a guy that was top 5, from injury being a part of it. They say it's a back injury. They feel like the arm is sound, but couldn't find the strike zone at all. I mean, Rick Ankiel is a name that I brought up. It's scary to do it, but just the complete loss of the strike zone. I get why he's not on this top 10 list. Did you, 1, consider him? 2, what are you hearing, or what do you think as far as the chances of getting him back on track? And the other thing I'll add in, I'll get your thoughts on, is Dayton Moore said to me in a conversation that Asa Lacy is going to be a part of a championship pitching staff. Whether he's a starter or reliever, he doesn't know, but he'll be part of a championship staff. That scared the hell out of me. And it should scare the hell out of anyone in the Royals organization. If a guy you took that high, you're already, before he can even begin to sniff the big leagues, starting to think in terms of him just being a reliever. Where did he sit in your thoughts in putting this list together?
I was the high man on Asa Lacy last year. I had him number 2 on the organization, ahead of Prado and Melendez, and perhaps I was a little too optimistic on him and what he was going to do. But I just constantly hear from scouts, even with his troubles this year, scouts say his stuff is really, really good. He's had injury issues both of the last 2 years. This year it was back spasms that was affecting how he was landing in his delivery. And that, of course, is going to cause problems with your control. Now, is there a concern that 2 years in a row since he's been active with the Royals that he's had injuries that has affected his seasons? Perhaps. But I've done enough research on Lacy in the last 2 years. I could probably write a book about him. But it comes down to, he's got to throw strikes. And it's from one source I was hearing, or several sources, that he was kind of tinkering with different pitches this year. And a scout that I talked to him that knew him from way back not way back, but back when he was in Texas A&M, saying he just needs to get back to what he was throwing at A&M, and then, get the command back, get the control back, and then start messing with his pitch repertoire. So it'll be real curious. I'm assuming he's going to have a big league invite this year to camp again. And I'm curious what the new coaches will do. He's just one of many large projects they have this year.
So one of the other things that has been kind of a disappointment with the Royals farm system the last several years, we mentioned the pitching in general, but when Dayton Moore was first hired, this administration first came in, one of the first things that they set out to do was change the Royals' imprint in Latin America. Before Dayton Moore, the Royals, I think, had the least amount of talent of any major league organization coming out of Latin America in their history. And within 18 months, maybe 12 months of Dayton Moore being hired and bringing on Rene Francisco as his international coordinator, they had signed as amateurs Salvador Perez, Kelvin Herrera, and then Giordano Ventura. I mean, if you come up with that much talent, every 5 to 10 years in Latin America, you're doing very, very well. But the last 5 to 10 years, it's really been kind of a drought. I mean, Adalberto Mondesi, maybe the last impact guy, and obviously the talent there is remarkable. He's never been able to stay healthy, but from a pure talent standpoint, we'll give them that. But you look at the last couple of years, and they spent, what was it, $3.7 million on Eric Pena, and he seems like a bust at this point. I mean, it's just he hit like 140 in A-ball this year. You go back to like Siuli Matias and Jason Guzman, and those guys got so much money in the Latin America that the Royals were penalized and couldn't actually sign Latin American players above a certain bonus level for a few years. They were so certain of those guys' talent that they were willing to take that penalty on, and neither one of those guys has panned out. And we mentioned Maikel Garcia and Angel Serpa, but it seems like the Royals are really struggling to develop talent from Latin America. And I know you don't cover the Latin American beat specifically, but as these guys come through the system, I'm curious what you've heard about whether they are just identifying the wrong players. You have to sign these guys when they're 16 years old, and it's harder to scout guys when they're that much farther from the majors. But is there something that the Royals are doing wrong, or is there something that they're trying to change about their Latin American approach in recent years? And if there are any Latin American players maybe that you've heard rumblings about who are like 17, 18 years old, who might actually be top prospects here in a couple of years.
Yes, I can speak to that, at least for the ones that are in the system right now. I think with Matias and Guzman, that's past history, and I think Matias did re-sign with the organization, and I wish him the best of luck. When we look at Eric Pena, Wilman Candelario, Daniel Vasquez, who are some of the ones they signed more recently, they all went to Colombia this year. One of the issues and one of the problems I think Major League Baseball introduced when they pared down the minor league system was eliminating the short season level. Should Eric Pena, Candelario, Vasquez been in low A at their age and their experience level? We could probably debate that all night, but they all three struggled at that level. So Eric Pena especially, and there's still a lot of hope for Eric Pena. He's got tools, got the makeup. Maybe just give him more time. These players were also affected by missing a whole season after they signed. Missed the whole 2020 season. They couldn't go to their academy. So that's a factor. But there are some success stories in the organization. One player who is jumped on and moved up pretty quickly in the organization this year is Diego Hernandez. And, if you're talking about pop-up guys, Hernandez could be that kind of guy. He's gotten stronger, still needs to get stronger yet. But if his ceiling is a top of the order hitter, a plus defender in center field, stealing 30, 40 bases a year. Another example is the player they signed last year, and I did not get to see him, Juan Olmos. It was a catcher that was signed. I think he was their top pick, or not top pick, but top bonus in the 2021 international period in January. I didn't get to see him. He was injured most of the year in the DSL. Came to instructional league late. I saw him, I think, go out and warm up a pitcher, and that was all. But I did talk to a scout who saw him in some intra-squad games in the backfield, and he said, "Hey, this kid could be legit." He said, "I kind of see Salvi Perez." Now, you don't want to put that comp on the kid, but he did throw in that name. Now, another name I have for you that really was a surprise this year is Lisandro Rodriguez, a middle infielder. And I saw him in rookie ball this year, and then I knew he went up to Colombia. And as I was getting, it was during the fall league season, I'd be running into scouts, and I said, "Yeah, I've got to be working on my 11 to 30 for the Royals." And two different guys, unsolicited, said, "Oh, do you have Lisandro Rodriguez on that list?" I said, "Well, that's certainly a name I'm going to ask about." And he will be on the top 30, barring any changes before the book goes to press. But unlike the players who went to Colombia and struggled for, I believe Rodriguez is 19 years old, his numbers there were almost as good as they were in rookie ball. So there are some success stories. Yes, they don't have the successes yet of Salvi Perez or some of the other names you mentioned, but I don't think there's anything different about their international development from their development other players. Some are going to hit, some are going to miss, and I think that's the case here.
Listen, when signing guys at 16, and let's be honest, what really goes on and coming to agreements oftentimes at age 15 and 14 and the under the table stuff that happens down in Latin America. I think we all get, if you're listening to our podcast, you're a pretty hardcore baseball fan. And so you understand how far away and how much projection you have to do, and that you're not going to hit at a high rate, right? There's going to be a lot of attrition there. Something that was interesting and made a big deal from a big league level and around Kansas City was John Sherman at the press conference announcing the change of general manager. And after Dayton Moore wasn't supposed to be there, but said he wanted to speak, and he spoke, and then he left. And then John Sherman commented, and he was taking questions. And one of the things John Sherman said, and I don't think he phrased it really well because it's kind of blown up on him. But what he said was, Dayton Moore's always talking about what a championship club looks like. I'd like to see what a wild card club looks like. What I believe he meant, and from talking to people in the organizations, they're confident, having had talked to him. What he meant was Dayton's swinging for the fences. Dayton is always going for the superstar. Dayton is always trying to get the championship guy. And I've had those conversations. He talked about it. He said many times, we can't sign a Ken Griffey Jr. or an Alex Rodriguez. We're going to have to draft them. So that was his approach. I mean, they were always toolsy and going for the home run guy. Is that their problem in Latin America? Or is it just, like I said, you're talking about coming to agreements with kids that are 14, 15, 16 years old. It's going to be tough because the Astros had 2 or 3 guys at the top of their rotation and at the top of their bullpen that were like $20,000 signs, some of them at age 18 in Latin America. Is it fundamentally broken in how they did it in the past and hopefully need to be fixed? Or is this just, we need to calm down and this is the math of it, of so much, so much projection having to be a part of the equation?
I think you could say that about every team, just the way the environment is in international. As you said, they're making agreements with players who are 14 years old. Could you imagine going to a high school freshman and say, we want you in our organization, so we'll see you in a couple of years. And those players don't have the leagues to play in, and sometimes they get hidden. So it's really a broken system. But you look around baseball, how many players have gotten $4 or $5 million bonuses out of international market that have not made it, that came to the States and really were flops. On the other hand, the guy that another organization, but a player that really shot up last year, and I never knew anything about him till a scout pointed him out to me in extended spring training, was Ellie De La Cruz, who is now the Reds' top prospect. Nobody knew who he was until I think it was one night in May. He started he was playing in an extended spring training game, and scouts started saying, oh, who is this guy? And now he's the top prospect. But I think he signed for, it was under 100,000, like maybe 90,000 or something like that. Ronald Acuna did not sign for a big bonus. So I don't know that the Royals are doing anything differently than anyone else. And again, I know Eric Payne, got a big contract, and we just need to give him some more time.
So I know we've been talking about, all these prospects way down in the low minor leagues who maybe have a chance to be a star at some point. That's the sexy talk. But you need bench guys too. You need organizational depth too. And the one guy that really popped up on the Royals' radar this season in that regard was Nate Eaton, who was a late round pick, I think a 21st round draft pick, and was kind of an organizational guy who could play a lot of positions and could run and throw, but couldn't really hit. And then he started hitting AAA, and the Royals brought him up, and he was, extremely valuable bench guy in Kansas City for the last 2 months of the season. And some of his StatCast metrics in terms of his throwing arm, in terms of his running speed, were elite. And really, for a guy who was 25 or 26 years old now, really kind of shocking. So I'm curious if in process of doing a lot of your minor league evaluations, if you've heard anything about what Nate Eaton sort of projects as. Is this guy just a bench guy, or is he somebody who has a chance to be a starter in the majors?
He's a very interesting guy, and we've never had him on a top 30, and he's kind of on the bubble of it now because, again, he's a little bit older. Does he project as a starting player? I don't know. 10 years ago, Whit Merrifield, or however long ago, Whit Merrifield never made a top 30. And I'm not saying Eaton can be that type of ball player, but he's going into with the same profile that Merrifield had at the time. He can play a lot of positions, infield, outfield. He's a good clubhouse guy. He's a good guy to have in your team. And I think that's going to give him a fairly long career. Will he ever be a regular player? Maybe, maybe not. But I think he's going to be a big leaguer and stay a big leaguer for a while.
I want to go back, if we could, to Gavin Cross, just because, he is the top guy on your list. Are we, you said, you mentioned the comp, like, hey, putting Salvador Perez next to a young catcher, that's a difficult thing to do. Gavin Cross was picked in the top 10. There are going to be big expectations there. What would be the comp you'd put on Gavin Cross?
I've got to think about that one. I don't think he's going to stay in center field. He's probably more of a right fielder. He's got the arm to play there. He's a natural hitter. He's going to hit, and he's going to hit with some power. So I've got to think a little bit about who, and it's hard to give comps like this, but
I put you on the spot for sure.
Yeah, I'll have to give that some thought,
okay.
And maybe it'll pop into my head later.
But you said you think right field over center, right?
Right.
And I've heard some people in the Royals still think center field, which to me, everybody else, like yourself, seems to be thinking it's going to right field. Does he justify the pick? Does he justify the spot? I know we talked about it when he was picked. Listen. One of the knocks on Dayton Moore is that he would make draft. I don't think this is necessarily fair, but I think that it just seemed to be more than a coincidence that, if they were a player of faith, they seem to move up the Royals, list. And Gavin Cross is one of those. And we heard the stories, and the Royals even talked about it, about his father and ministries and things like that when he was signed, which had brought chills down a lot of Royals fans' backs, because they're like, oh, wait a minute, we're just taking a guy that they're taking a guy that, that fits their community sense more than it does fit the ballpark and trying to win. Is Gavin Cross. And so if that word gets out there and everybody starts to put him at the Royals draft pick, okay, he goes where everybody thought, but did they think he was going to the Royals because they knew the Royals were going to take a guy whose faith was was an important thing? Does Gavin Cross's talent equal where he ended up being drafted, and do you think that'll end up being a solid pick?
I believe so, because if you look at any of the pre-draft mock drafts or rankings of draft prospects, he was up there. He was a top 10, at least a top 15 guy in the draft. So, it was not taking him was not a stretch. It wasn't taken as a money saver. Like, we know why Frank Mazzucato was taken. I think it was 7th overall, because he signed for less, and then they could get Cadorna, who was another first round talent, in the second round. With Cross, he's a legit first rounder, and a likely first division regular. And whether he plays right field or center field, that's probably going to depend more on the team needs at the time. If they've got Drew Waters who can play center, or Kyle Isbell, or if Diego Hernandez reaches his potential, you may have somebody who's a better center fielder than Cross. And I think that's why we look more that he's more likely to wind up in right field.
So the one other guy on the top 10 I really would like to talk about, because I feel like he's kind of underrated as not just a Royals prospect, but as a major league prospect, because given his age and what he did in the second half of the season, especially, the upside with this guy is immense, and that's Carter Jensen.
Right.
And, he's a local kid, another one of the guys that the Royals were able to sign for a little above slot because they saved money on Mazzucato last year. And his plate discipline is just outrageous for any Royals prospect, let alone a kid that turned 19 in the middle of the season. And I don't have his exact numbers in front of me, but basically from the time he turned 19 until the end of the year, he had an OPS of like well over 900. And for a kid that young, and we haven't even mentioned the fact that he's a catcher. So I'm very curious. Do you think? Anytime there's a catcher in the minor leagues, if there's any questions about their ability to catch at the major league level, that usually means they move off of the position. And now he has a bat that I presume that he could be a good prospect, even if he's not catching. But if he can stay at that position, I think he could become an absolute elite prospect. So I'm curious what you think of him as a potential catcher, and if not a catcher, what position he would likely play. And, if that bat is as special as he showed the potential of being this year.
He's athletic enough that he could go to other positions, but catching is such a rarity. Good catching, is such a rarity in baseball anymore. When you've got someone, like Jensen, and he's way too young to be talking about that at this point. Anyhow, what he did at, like you said, he turned 19 when he was in low A, and he did start slowly, but he came on strong. But it's not. I think we'd be years away from even beginning to talk about should Jensen move to another position. And I've, okay, Bryce Harper, it was the right move to get him out from behind the plate. Will Jensen, probably the same thing with him. I've seen other examples where, no, they should have left him behind the plate because they just never developed, and we won't, go into any names, but leave him there as long as you can. The kid has been a catcher. He likes to be catch, and he will develop the catching skills. He's got a good foundation already. So I would certainly leave him there as long as you can.
I think that's great to hear. Well, we also are watching MJ Melendez at the big league level try to learn a new position, right? Like when is make or break, and when do you do you look back and are you looking at MJ Melendez now and saying what are they messing around with him in the outfield, or are you looking at MJ Melendez right now and saying why didn't they do this 2 years ago? Like my opinion, and I'm certainly open to somebody shouting me down, but you should have got this figured out sooner, and he shouldn't be trying to, one, learn how to hit big league pitching, and then two, learn a new position in a 3-deck league, right? This is something that he should have been doing before he got there, or do you view it differently?
Well, with MJ, I don't think it's a question of, can he catch? I think he's proven that he can catch at the big league level. But you've got Salvador Perez, who, how many games a year does he play behind the plate? A good chunk of the season. So I see that as just a way to get MJ in the lineup a little more, and he's athletic enough to handle it. And we're in an area where, Aaron, now we don't have the 15, the players don't carry 15 or 16 position players anymore. They're carrying more like 13. So the more versatility you can get out of those 13 players, the better. And that's what I see with MJ.
So the last guy I really want to talk about, as Soren mentioned, was one of my favorites is Maikel Garcia, because I really just feel like people are sleeping on him as a potential everyday shortstop in the major leagues. He's young. He has shown the ability to hit for average and make contact throughout his career, but really didn't show much pop until this season. And when he made the move to AAA, he actually, I want to say he hit like 7 home runs in like 6 weeks in AAA, and I think 11 or 12 for the season. And he's only 22 years old. He did briefly play with the Royals at the major league level and held his own. And defensively, I feel like, he has the skills to be, an above average defensive shortstop. And I'm curious as to whether, your impression from talking to scouts, not just inside the organization, but outside the organization, is this a guy who could actually play every day at shortstop? And if the Royals see him that way, what does that mean for him versus Bobby Witt? I mean, they seem to be committed to Bobby Witt at shortstop, not moving him to third base for next year. Does that mean Maikel Garcia is a trade candidate, or I'm just curious as to what you think that his future is with the organization.
It's interesting because we were talking about Diego Hernandez before, and Garcia is a level ahead of Hernandez, but I see a lot of similarities in how they've developed as a hitter. In both cases, they needed to get much stronger. They needed to improve their approach to the plate, and they both have over the years. They're both plus defenders at their position. Now, what does that mean for Maikel? With Bobby Witt now probably playing shortstop for the next 10 or 15 years. Maybe he goes to second base, a utility. It probably depends more on how the bat develops over the next year. He's right now you profile him as more of a back of the order hitter, but if he continues to improve and shows a lot in AAA this year, then are we talking about more of a top of the order hitter? And that'll make some determinations. I think that's the case with Garcia.
Bill, we know how much work goes into putting together a top 10 list. Rany and I, just our little flimsy lists that we do. And you're putting together more than 10, as you mentioned, going all the way down through 30 on the organization. You and everyone else at Baseball America do a fantastic job. It is
thank you.
Great. It is so great to see your work and see and trust me, we do appreciate all the time and effort that goes into it. And I love anyone that'll put their name next to a list, right? Like everybody loves to complain about, well, why is this guy 5? And not understanding. I know from having been an AP voter in college football and college basketball, everyone's upset about their team, and I'm sure it's the same way with their guys. So we just want to say thanks for joining us. We kept you longer. Shocking, Rany and I can talk, and we kept you longer than we said we would. But we really appreciate you joining us, and thanks so much for sharing our time, and keep up the great work there at Baseball America.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. Bill Mitchell from Baseball America with us there. Great stuff from him, Rany, and I do mean it. Bill and everyone there at Baseball America does fantastic work, and it's not. Whoops, wrong one there. It's not it's not an easy job, and it's certainly a labor of love. And are you encouraged by the list now that we got it? Because we were just talking about it last week that we couldn't wait for it to get up there.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've got it. Do you like it? We haven't touched on that.
I like it because it does actually conform a lot to what I had to say. I mean, I think I might have had Drew Waters even higher. But like Maikel Garcia, I think I had at 4, and 6 is, I was aggressive at 4 maybe, but 6 fits. I didn't have Asa Lacy in my top 10. I had Carter Jensen in there. So I do like it. We didn't talk about Angel Serpa, who I think is a guy who neither one of us had quite that high, and is one of these sort of, left-handed, I guess I'm trying to think of, he's not crafty, a guy who never gets the headlines, but could turn into a league average starter. Maybe the upside of him would be like a Jose Quintana type or something. I feel like the organization is going through a transition with all the players that they graduated, obviously, but I do feel that there is another wave coming. And he talked about that, and I was actually quite excited when we started talking about Latin American guys that were low in the minors and that are sort of going to maybe be on this list next year. That he mentioned Lisandro Rodriguez. That's one guy I don't think we've mentioned, but late in the year really stuck out as somebody. He reminds me of where Maikel Garcia was a year or two ago in terms of very young, top of the order type skills, middle infielder, and that combination of getting on base, playing a key defensive position, and youth. Those are 3 things that I really look for in any prospect. And so that's another guy I'm looking forward to seeing more of next year. So I feel when you factor in how much talent, if you factored in all the quote unquote prospects who are now major leaguers, if you added in Pasquantino and Melendez and, guys who had 300 plate appearances with Michael Massey, I think the organization, the under 25 talent level here is actually very good. It's just that a lot of it graduated this year.
Yeah, and that's one of the things Bill said, and that's one of the things that makes this list harder for him to do. But I'll echo your sentiments, and I'll also add, I like that we're hearing guys up the middle, right? We're hearing catcher. He's saying Carter Jensen can stay. It's too early. He didn't guarantee, that he's going to be there. But, we heard a couple of catchers, in the mix. I think it's always important to have catching. And frankly, that's something that Dayton Moore and JJ Picola have preached for a long time, that they always want to invest in catchers every year. So if you don't have any catchers on your list after you've been investing in them every year, then that would be a really scary sign. But they do. We know Melendez just graduated, and now there's more catching on the way. But then shortstop, we're hearing shortstops, we're hearing center fielders. That's if you can play those elite positions defensively, then you can graduate over to the other ones that aren't as elite. Hopefully the bats play. Cross looks like, I'm happy to hear Bill, kind of say, yeah, this is where it's going. And hopefully that'll ultimately end up being where the Royals land, as opposed to pushing them out to center field to not be good out there. Right. Like that's one of the things.
Well, and they don't need to. I'll say this for the Royals, that they, if they may say now that Gavin Cross projects the center, and they're always going. A good organization is always going to leave a guy at a position as long as there's a chance. The last thing you want to do is give up on him prematurely. He's been in the organization, for 40 games or whatever. But the Royals have shown through their history, if there's one thing the Royals show consistently, it's that they value center field defense, and they're pretty good about judging what makes a good defensive center fielder. I mean, they stuck with Gerard Dyson in the minor leagues when nobody thought he was ever going to be a major leaguer. And he turned out to be an incredibly valuable player, in part because he played such exceptional defensive center. They traded for Lorenzo Cain when Cain was sort of in that twilight zone between being a prospect and being a major leaguer. And he turned into an elite defensive center fielder. They went out and spent money on Michael Taylor when he was kind of, I don't want to say washed up, but had reached a career crossroads with the Nationals. And Michael Taylor has been a very valuable player for the Royals the last few years because of great center field defense. So if there's one thing that I can really hang my hat on that this organization knows how to judge well, it's center field defense. So if they, if Cross if they keep him out there, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. But I do expect that at some point he'll move to right field, in part because they have other really good defensive center fielders that they can play. And by moving him out to right field, then they can have elite defense potentially in 2 outfield positions.
And one of the things we won't know, and it's not really what Bill does, is can they identify who to keep and who to trade? Right? Like we talk about them being more transactional. If they do have this good group of young talent, this next wave, as it starts coming up, they've got to know who to trade, who to keep, and be more active. And I feel like that one of the reasons they haven't been more active up till now is because they don't know. They're not sure who's the real deal and who's not. And ask anyone who's ever done any fantasy league, who to cut is something you agonize over, and that you spend 30 minutes clicking on 50 different websites trying to get, confidence in which guy I'm going to cut for a guy I want to pick up. And, 2 years later, you sit and laugh, and I can't believe I sat there. Like, there was 4 guys, like we always talk about the 40-man, 4 guys that really aren't that good. And on down the road, that's what will end up being on this. You have to identify that early. If they can do that, then they know who they need to trade.
I'm still kicking myself for 10 years ago, 12 years ago in my Stratomatic League. My final cut one season was a disappointing rookie by the name of Ben Zobrist.
Yeah.
And let him go and turned into Ben Zobrist. So yes, I understand their concern. I will say this: you mentioned how the Royals keep identifying catchers and keep focusing on catching, which is great, but especially with Salvador Perez, it's kind of shocking to me that they haven't been more aggressive about trading from excess of catching. And this is the conundrum with MJ Melendez. It's like, even if you believe that he can catch, why his value with your organization is going to be less than anyone else because he's going to catch less for you than with any other team because you have Salvador Perez. And they didn't trade him, and they're kind of at a career crossroads with Melendez a little bit. But you have other guys in the system. Some of the guys we talked about are, Carter Jensen, Juan Olmos, he mentioned, who's 17 years old. These guys we don't have to worry about for a few years. But Luca Tresh, for instance, who I believe on his list, Baseball America, they put out a best tools in the organization, and Luca Tresh is listed as their best defensive catcher, which I think is very interesting because I know his offensive numbers. It's harder to judge his defense. If he's a great defensive catcher, some team out there might look at him as a potential starter. So this coming season, if he has a good year, do you look at him as well? He's a good backup to Salvador Perez, or maybe you can get more for him. So yes, I'm really hoping the Royals, if they are developing this talent, this current wave, with guys like Pasquantino and Massey, they had a need for those guys at the major league level. Like, they needed to replenish the major league system, but it as a luxury of doing that, if they're developing more talent, maybe it's time to trade some of that for the pitching that you can't seem to develop yourself.
Yeah, no doubt. And a couple of comments, Jason, they're afraid to trade. I mean, I would say that. Yeah. I mean, because they've had guys, at least by ratings, by, media folks and people like Bill, that have had, hey, these are talented guys, and they never move any of them. Oftentimes we see them come up and not end up being what they're supposed to be when it's all said and done. Let's finish with this, Rany. You asked for it and you got it, my friend. Spend some money in free agency. I mean, was it the holiday spirit where you just warmed with holiday spirit when Ryan Yarbrough was announced as the newest Kansas City Royal?
Well, it occurred. John Sherman had the press conference to discuss some of the stadium developments, and he sort of dropped some breadcrumbs, I think, during the press conference, that we may be adding some starting pitching or some pitching talent. Look for that in the next couple of days. And 10 minutes after the press conference ended, the word broke. And I think it's a reflection of what I thought about Ryan Yarbrough, that my first thought was, well, he said a couple of days, so maybe there's somebody else that they're talking about, because Ryan Yarbrough can't be the guy that they're pinning their hopes on as the pitcher that they're adding. And no offense to Ryan Yarbrough, and I think he's a useful pitcher, and I think he will be, a useful guy in this organization. But Ryan Yarbrough wasn't a free agent because he got to 6 years of service time. Ryan Yarbrough was a free agent because the Tampa Bay Rays let him go. He was designated for assignment, I believe is the term. Granted free agency maybe is the euphemism. But the point is that after making $3.85 million in 2022, with a little over 4 years of service time, they just decided that he wasn't worthy of being tendered a contract because he is arbitration eligible and would have made more than that. And they weren't willing to pay him more than that. And the Royals weren't either because they paid him $3 million. So he's getting a pay cut. Now, if he has a good year, because he has only 4 years of service time, they essentially have an option on him built in for 2024 because he won't be a free agent if they choose not to make him one next year. And he can start and relieve. He's left-handed. That those two things in and of themselves, I think, will make him a useful addition to the team. He throws strikes. He averages about 2 walks per 9 innings, which is a very welcome addition to this organization. But his career ERA plus is 94. He's essentially a league average guy, and he did that spending his entire career with the Rays. And yes, that's, it's nice that Matt Quatrero has some familiarity with him and maybe knows how to use him and maybe thinks there's some untapped potential there. But the reality is, I don't typically expect a pitcher leaving the Rays, coming to the Royals to suddenly improve. Now, you can make all the Wade Davis references you want, but Wade Davis was actually a very good reliever for the Rays, but they put him back in the rotation when the Royals had gotten him, and the Royals tried him in the rotation, and he was also bad. So I don't think Wade Davis necessarily got better with the Royals. He just finally was put in a role he could succeed in. So Yarbrough is what he is. He's depth, and good teams need depth, but good teams also need stars, and they're still looking for one of those.
Yeah, the velocities aren't like way off his career numbers, but they're trending down, which usually happens. But guys, that's fine. Max Scherzer doesn't throw what he used to throw, but his stats are all trending down as well. And he was the guy that benefited most. I know because from a fantasy baseball perspective, not to keep talking about fantasy baseball, but I loved him because he counted as a reliever, and I was getting five innings out of the guy, and getting starter like numbers. But we have a limit on how many starters you can have, and I was able to put him in because he didn't start. That's how we chose to do it when they went with the opener. So I am a little bit intrigued. Like maybe they're thinking opener with him, and they didn't really do that. They started him more this year. And maybe if you get past the 1, 2, 3, and they're going to be a little more creative, I think the Royals are the perfect team to go with an opener. Maybe you're Yarbrough behind some, fireballing right-hander for 5 batters or 6 batters or something. Will be a good combination. And the manager knows him, right? So he was hurt, I'm guessing, based upon I can't remember, but I'm assuming he's hurt since he didn't pitch till May, and then he had a stint where he didn't pitch for like 3 or 4 weeks. So maybe he battled some arm injuries. Hopefully he's healthy, but the numbers have been going the wrong direction every year. And I think a pretty good rule of thumb would be if the Rays call about a guy, don't give him to him, right? And if the Rays are willing to give you a guy, don't take him. And this guy, as you said, was put out on the market. The Rays seem to be the smartest kids in the room. The only reason, and again, so I like Yarbrough, the guy. I have hope. It's not a ton of money. There's no such thing as a bad 1-year contract, to quote Rany Jazayerli, what he said on my radio show one time, and I agree with that. But I don't know. I guess they're starting. They're off and running. Now let me see more.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the decline in velocity. Yes, and Max Scherzer doesn't throw as hard as he used to either. But it's one thing when you start your career throwing 99 and your fastball drops to 97. It's a little bit different when your fastball as a rookie averaged 89 or 89.4, and now last year his average fastball was 86.8 according to the Fangraphs page here. Look, all you need to know is Zach Greinke's average fastball was 89.2 last year. This guy throws 2 miles an hour slower than Zach Greinke. Yes, he's left-handed. That probably is worth 2 or 3 miles an hour right there. But this is a finesse guy. This is, a guy who's definitely a change of pace. And if he throws strikes, that might be a good thing because the Royals have hard throwers who have struggled to throw strikes. But I mean, this isn't even, a Chris Bubich level. We think of Chris Bubich as a more of a finesse guy, which I think is just a testament to modern baseball because Chris Bubich's average fastball was 91.9 last year. This guy throws 5 miles an hour slower than Chris Bubich. So, yeah, temper your expectations. This is not a guy I expect much from. But if it just means that they can keep themselves from promoting a pitcher from the minors who's not ready, and inhibiting their development, maybe it allows Angel Yarbrough to, get a little more refinement in AAA before he gets called up. Because frankly, I think Angel Yarbrough could be a better version of Ryan Yarbrough. There's some value there. It's 1 year, it's $3 million. In the worst case scenario, and he's terrible, and they have to release him in April, they're out $3 million. It's not going to make or break their season, but it's not going to make their season. That's the problem.
Yeah, I'll give the last word here to Jason when I said they're often running in free agency. No, often walking in free agency.
Crawling, I would say.
I will grant you
Maybe
that.
they'll stand up soon.
Yeah. All right. Remember, we're brought to you by our friends again, Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the entire KC Metro. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crew. Every project comes with a written warranty. You can find them online at ganasphalt.com. Great company that is a full service paving and pavement maintenance contractor. Anything with parking lots, they handle it. Been doing it in Kansas City since 1994. Gan Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lots. For the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, I'm Soren Petro, saying thank you very much for joining us here in Kauffman Corner.